People go into a film like this or a queer film like expecting it to be like vegetables or a screed or something. I think a lot of queer art is maybe like humorless and not self-effacing and goofy in the way that I am.
I don't want to make another dumb sequel in the Camp Miasma franchise. I don't want to make a remake of a remake of a remake. I want to make something that feels fresh and new.
So far in my work, gender transition has been like something of a muse, I'd say. The period of time when I was finding my voice as an artist happened to coincide with the period of time, perhaps non-coincidentally, when I was transitioning, starting that process. And so the work has sort of like almost become a timeline of what I've been going through as I've become myself. My first two films, I Saw the TV Glow and We're All Going to the World's Fair, which really are like less about transition and more about like working up the courage to transition, are pretty dark movies as a result. You know, they're movies about, getting ready to essentially like blow up your life and enter really uncharted waters. This was the first movie where I really felt like in a place where I was ready to talk about like all of the things that come after that and all of the slow but joyful and surreal and magical parts of coming into your own body and sexuality and identity, which is something that I experienced in my like mid-30s, even though I think it's something that like we classically think of as very teenage experiences. This adage of it as second puberty, I think is very real. And I wanted to make a movie from inside that. Like I wanted to make a movie that was speaking really honestly about that experience, because I don't think we have a lot of bodies of work that are speaking about this slow process of becoming yourself that is gender transition.
Little Death isn't real.
Well, not with that attitude, he isn't. If you've seen his movies, you know he always comes back.
The horror genre has always been a muse as well for me. And on this film specifically, like the slasher genre just felt like the perfect way to talk about this like messy, gory, strange, like fleshy, fluid experience of becoming myself. And obviously like the slasher genre has long been obsessed with rituals of gender and sexuality, and it became a way for me to talk about what I was going through personally. I think the idea of like gender deviance in the slasher genre has been something I've always been interested in. Like I read Carol Clover's Men, Women, and Chainsaws in college and kind of like never stopped thinking about it. This is like a book of theory about like the strange rituals of gender in the slasher genre. I've always loved slasher movies, and so that helps as well, is that like if I'm going to make a movie, I want it to be in a genre that I can just like have a lot of delight in playing with the tropes of the genre, you know, and just like have cinematic fun. And I think it was also the understanding after transition that's so much of what I needed to get over if I was going to really like embody my own identity sexually in a way that felt like not wrought with shame and dissociation, was sort of like defeating the final boss of like Buffalo Bill, Norman Bates, Sleepaway Camp in my own mind. These images of like the trans monster or the trans killer as like grotesque and monstrous. These were like popular cultural images that I and everyone was fed in the 1990s and, you know, for decades before that. It felt very natural that as I was learning to like reframe my own self-image into a place of liberation and love, that like that would involve like the slasher genre, which like above all other film genres, I think is sort of wrought with these images of the trans grotesque. I think in a lot of ways, like I'm trying to poke fun at myself a bit through the character. I'm really proud of the way in which I think the movie invites people in. That the movie has like a sense of humor about itself. For whatever reason, people go into a film like this or a queer film like expecting it to be like vegetables or a screed or something. I think a lot of queer art is maybe like humorless and not self-effacing and goofy in the way that I am. And so it was really important to me that the film be sort of like in on its own joke a little bit, and so through that character, and obviously, yes, she's a queer filmmaker making a horror movie. I'm playing with autobiography in some way there, but I think in many ways I'm trying to sort of like poke fun at the most like pretentious aspects of myself through that character. And Hannah was just like the perfect person to embody Kris. Like, she's so funny. She's so charismatic. She's so goofy. I really trusted her to like play a version of me that was maybe like exaggerated and a little, yeah, like a little more absurd than I would be comfortable with if I was playing that role myself. She's also just so like wonderfully witty and charming and emotive. And I do think that one of the tricks that the movie does that only works because of how amazingly talented she is that she sort of starts out the movie as a little bit of the like the straight man or the person who's like pointing out all of the tropes of the genre, who's like on the outside of the movie's campier elements. But by the end of the movie, she like, you know, the character and the movie itself, it's like she's learned to just sort of be, you know, not in her head, but in her body. And what that results in is this performance where like, yeah, she goes from maybe on the outside looking in to fully inside something. And yeah, the places that Hannah was able to go because of how talented she is and how like an emotional open book she is, I think are like pretty phenomenal.
If it gets too real, you can always turn it off.
The whole activity of being like 11 years old and just obsessed with the video store, and there being this one section of the video store where all of the boxes were like red and gory, and you weren't really supposed to go over there and rent them, but you're kind of like looking at it out of the corner of your eye, and you're fascinated by it, but a little afraid of it, but you also want to go over there and you want to rent that Nightmare on Elm Street 3 box that's like tantalizing you and calling to you. You know, that's queer in its way. I think that like the slasher and horror genre, yeah, and like the way that those movies, and especially like just like the physical VHS box as like a thing, as a force, as a physical object, like sort of loomed in space growing up. I've like likened it to like the Playboy in the woods from like decades earlier, you know? It's like, oh, I know I'm not supposed to pop that into the VCR and watch it, but I really want to. That was always there for me from a really, really young age. When I was in 5th grade, my best friend and I rented every Nightmare on Elm Street movie over the course of a week. And at first it was something that felt completely forbidden and like, oh, this tape might not be safe. And very quickly it just became like junk food, you know, like something to gorge on whenever I could sneak away and, you know, lock the basement door.